My name is Deborah Parks, and I started in the film industry in 1979, 1980. I worked originally in the camera end of things, starting off as a camera assistant, and continued pretty much throughout my career until I was shooting, and then went on to producing and production managing and shooting all at the same time. I think the earliest memories I have of photography and cinema was through my parents. My dad was a DOP for the military, the Canadian Armed Forces, and he traveled a lot. So he came home at the end of every trip with stories and of his travels, and I always thought that he led such an exciting life. But on the other end of it, besides the stories, there were always the films that he shot and his photographs, the photography part of it as well. So I think at a very early age, I was inspired. It was all part of our lifestyle. He was also very involved in the military community as a photographer, a school photographer, wedding photographer, all of that. So it was always there. When I eventually was trying to figure out what I was going to do for a living, kind of gravitated to photography first, and then my dad introduced me to a director in Ottawa, because we were living in Ottawa at the time, who was working for the National Film Board. And he said to me, "Why don't you call him up and maybe you can work with him, or do some kind of training with the company." And so I did. That's what I did. I started working for this Gary Nichols in Ottawa, a small company, and I worked for free. And basically, it's kind of like an internship. And I didn't start as a camera assistant in the beginning. Basically, it was carrying equipment, driving, doing all that kind of thing. But I got my feet wet, and I got an idea of what the industry was about, especially the documentary world. Because I think in those years, it was a much bigger part of the whole industry. I think Canadian television, English television, and feature films wasn't like it is today. So I gravitated to the documentary world. I've always had a strong visual sense, and I'm very socially conscious, and always have mostly worked in areas of activism and human rights, women's rights, that kind of thing, and I'm very passionate about that. So I think when your question about sensitivity, I bring my passion for those subjects into my shooting. So I prefer verite. I do a lot of verite. I have done a lot of verite in my past, and I think being a woman, dealing with women's subjects, women's issues, really is a strong point, in bringing out the right sensitivities. I'm very, conscious of movement. When I'm filming, I'm very conscious of movement in a frame. I'm very conscious of how I'm perceived as a shooter when I'm in a verite situation, right? I always try to be very low key. I'm very sensitive to what's going on. There are times when you're dealing with very difficult subject matter. You need to put the camera down. There's a point where you need to put the camera down. I'm not that kind of. I don't push to get the tears. I don't push to get that drama that I've seen a lot of directors push for. Right. I think and dealing with subjects and people, you have to be really sensitive to their human condition that you're trying to capture. And I think I have that personality. And I've worked a lot over the years with a lovely woman, Shelley Saywell. We've made, last 27 years, we've made almost 20 films. And a lot of them are human rights issues, women's issues. And we are great collaborators. From the beginning stages of when I shot, she directed. We used to go out as a team, and it was just the two of us. And a sound, of course. And we used to be very fluid, in how we worked and how we approached our subjects. And then, of course, times changed, and I switched to more production managing and producing because I had 2 kids, and it was harder to work those long hours and travel. And I made the decision to sort of stay back. But I brought in the whole visual part of the craft that I had learned into my producing side of things. Collaboration is one of the biggest responsibilities that a DP could have. And I think everybody in every department has to be a collaborator. You need to share and work together, share your ideas and work together in order to achieve the final result. And part of the collaboration is just being able to get along with people, listening to people. The biggest struggles of becoming a cinematographer in the beginning was trying to balance, learning the craft, getting the opportunities with supporting yourself and making a living. Because you're freelance. I've always freelanced. And so there are years when I would have to do other things besides be a camera assistant and shoot, because I had to bring in the income in the early years. And I think that's how I segued into producing, because when I was a camera assistant and traveling a lot, I learned a lot about location management. So I was able to segue into location management work on bigger shoots because of my camera assistant work that took me around the world. So that was a very logical way to go. And then that, turned into more producing. The second thing was just acceptance. I had not a lot of problems. I had a lot of great support by DPs that I worked with as a camera assistant. But there were the few that were inappropriate, the things that I had to do. And at that point, I didn't know any better. But it wasn't just the DPs, it was also directors. It was also directors, producers, and it wasn't just the men, it was also the women. I mean, I worked with one director years and years ago in the beginning of my career. And when she saw me working as a camera assistant, she said to me, "Why do you want to be a camera assistant? It's not good enough. You should be a director." Right? I'll never forget that. It was like, "It's not good enough," she said to me. And I had to think about that for a moment and think about, well, is there value in going this route? But I really did have to think about that. And then I just said, no, it's what I want to do. So I think you just have to be really strong and understand where you want to go and find those people that are going to support you in getting to where you are. And it doesn't always come from the crew. It comes from, in our case, in my case, I think the biggest opportunity came from a funding agency. It was one of the first long format films that I shot, and it was the first long format film that Shelley Saywell directed. And nobody wanted to take the risk with us, but our families gave us cash, and we went to the OMDC and we said, we want to do this film, and we're going, whether you invest in this film or not, we're going, because we've raised some cash. And it was actually Bill House that said, okay, I'll take the risk. And that was 86. We went off and by that time we had been working in the industry for a while, so we weren't going out green, right? We traveled, we worked with big crews before, so we knew what we were doing. But in that year, only 4% of all production was given to women. 4% in 1986, and we were one of those 4%. And he gave us the opportunity. So that was kind of I think that was kind of the liftoff. And it was very, very important. So it came from a totally unexpected person, right? When I started in the industry, I was, early 20s, mid 20s. So never thought about children at all. And it was later in my, around 30, after I started shooting, that I met up with Jan. And the whole idea, being that age, and the whole idea of children, was very much a topic of conversation. And was shooting at the time. In fact, I was shooting No, the first film, Shahira, I got pregnant right after that film was finished, and had Yana, my first daughter, and I was still shooting after that. But it was really, really difficult in getting the support, like the babysitting support. So I didn't have parents that lived in the city. I had an Italian woman, a family that looked after my daughter. So it was always, and that worked out actually really well, because she would, you know, if I was late in the evening or overnight, she would take my oldest, my daughter. And so I had the flexibility with her. And I shot Talk 16 while I was pregnant with my second daughter. I shot until I was 7 months pregnant. And I didn't really know what was going to happen. I just thought, okay, well, you know, we'll see. So, you know, I managed with the first one. The second one's coming along 2 years later. Let's see what happens. And the second one came along, and it was totally changed the dynamics completely. You know, I took a few weeks off around the, you know, before she was born, to kind of get my mind around how I was going to deal with making a living and bringing in the income, because we were a 2-income family. And one of my friends was working at Telefilm Canada, and she said, there's a position here for a production analyst. And I said, production analyst? You know, how am I going to do that job? I don't know how to be a production analyst. And she said, no, you should apply, because Bill House is the head of Telefilm Canada Toronto. So I applied. And at that point, this was not in the early 90s, and at that point, they really wanted hands-on analysts who had worked in production. They worked in the field, because we're analyzing full production budgets and everything to do with the production. And I got the job. And I started, you know, I was 7 weeks after I gave birth, I started full-time at Telefilm and stayed there for 6 years. And that was a really good time to have a full-time job and still be active in the industry. But it wasn't planned at all. I think you just have to take opportunities and find a way, right? And that led to other opportunities. I don't think there are as many obstacles now. I think there's fewer, but I think the women are being pushed more into directing. And now that I'm producing, and I'm working with a few first-time filmmakers, and we discuss crews, and we discuss the creatives, you know, the DP, the composer, the editor, and we're finding that a lot of women who are that want to get into the industry, really, they want to direct. I don't know whether they think it's easier to direct, but there's a real push for them to be directors. So I think there's lots of things are happening in that area, but not for the other key creative positions. And there are a few filmmakers that I know that started off shooting, like Liz Marshall's for one. I mean, the obstacles are always there. They were when I started, they're there now. I think some of the obstacles have changed. When I got into the industry, there was a real, the government was actually trying to push women into non-traditional jobs. And so you're seeing it, you know, as truck drivers, as, you know, carpenters. The film board, Studio D, was involved in making films about non-traditional jobs for women back in the 70s. And so when I started working as a camera assistant, I already had a little bit of that, you know, thinking. You know, I was thinking, okay, this is non-traditional, but other women are doing it in other areas. I didn't think there'd be that many obstacles. I didn't realize there were many obstacles until I hit them. Like, I never thought it through. It was just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something would happen. I'd be tested, you know, for my strength or my, I don't know, just being able to work long days. As far as what I was getting paid, I think I was probably getting paid less than male camera assistants. I think there are jobs when I didn't even get paid at all. You know, it was just, you know, they'd say, come out for the experience, or you do it for the experience just to make the contacts. You know, being a female on a crew and traveling, that was a big obstacle. It wasn't just the crew that had a difficulty with it. It was also the families, you know, the spouses of the crew. Here you are traveling with a female camera assistant in a totally male crew, totally male environment. Right, and that sometimes would be an obstacle. I think the biggest obstacle I became aware of it when I wanted to make the transition from camera assisting to shooting. I was a camera assistant for about 8 years, full time, and even that transition, you know, like you'd think after so much time that went by that it would be there'd be an easier way in the documentary world. But you had to make your own opportunities, you had to make your own choices, and you had to just go out there and find something to shoot, you know, find somebody who would give you that opportunity to shoot. Whether it be running the second camera on an interview or just going out and getting B-roll for somebody, but just getting in there. And it's probably the same for most men anyway. It just, you know, camera assisting was fine, but shooting wasn't fine. I think the advice you get as you go through the system, you know, as you go through your career, right? At different stages of your career, you get the advice, you look for the advice, you find the advice. But in the very beginning, I did actually get good advice at the very beginning. I mean, I got an opportunity. You know, I had my father, you know, never thought of me being a girl or a woman as being an obstacle, right? That never was an issue. It never came up. So I think I went in blindly, which is probably a good way of going in, not thinking that there were going to be any obstacles, just following my heart, you know, working hard and trying to make contacts and doing the best I can. So the advice probably would be just never give up. You know, if you really believe in something, just never give up and just pursue it and find those people who are going to give you those opportunities and never turn down a job. I mean, I worked as a teleprompter, you know, I worked as a driver, I worked as a PA, you know, anytime there is an opportunity to meet the crew or meet a DP, I took it and always did the job well. Always do your job well, because no matter what you're doing, because that is part of who you are, and it's your credibility, your personality, because working in a technical field, it's hard work, you know, and you need to always be on top of things. And so I think you really need to consider those things when you start off. You know, how determined are you going to be? I think I'm hardworking. I have a very strong work ethic. Commitment to a job, very task-oriented. I always try my best to achieve, you know, what needs to be achieved for that day, never giving up. When you're out shooting, you know, you're dealing with a lot of obstacles. You know, you're tired, the weather, things don't work out the way you plan, equipment screws up on you. Whatever, they all happen, no matter how much you plan these things, right? It all happens. And you just have to say, okay, we'll deal with this one, you know, figure out what the solution is or a way around it. And you just learn to move that way or to work that way. Because in documentary, it's the best made plans always change. And sometimes you have opportunities you never thought you would get, you know, when looking for something else. The first film we ever made and financed was a big aha moment. Winning the CSC award in 1988 for Best Documentary was a big aha moment, especially when I went up on stage 8 months pregnant. It was kind of like, oh my God, not that was planned that way, but that was, you know, that was really, I think, a big moment, because it meant that I was part of the team. You know, I was accepted, you know, and I think that changed things for me personally, being recognized. every project that I finished, is a big aha moment. Every time you put in a good day's work, and you've achieved what you set out to achieve that day, as far as what you're shooting is a big aha moment for me. I think I've been lucky, been fortunate. A highlight moment is doing this interview right now. Never have I been interviewed about the work I've done. I mean, I work with a lot of different directors and producers and crews, and, you work with them because that's what you do, but I've never actually been asked about my life and about, how I achieved what I've achieved. So this is kind of like a highlight. So thank you for that opportunity, because I don't think we pat ourselves on the back. I don't think we acknowledge what we've achieved. I don't think we acknowledge the history that we've made, in the last, it's been 35 years since I've been in the industry. It's a long time. And actually, I was looking at some of the earlier CSC magazines. There are these women that were there before me, and I thought, who knows about them? And all the other camera assistants that I worked with in the very beginning in the 80s, Lori and Zoe, and there were Donna Mobbs. There's a number of them, and I can't remember their names now, but there's a whole group of us that were very active. And I often wonder what happened to them. I know a few of them, because we've kept in touch, but some of the others, what happened to them? I often want to know, where they went, whether they've continued in the industry, or because we were, I think we broke through the lines in those years. I have a project that I've been working on for the last 5 years I've been shooting. It's on World War II veterans, and I've been following a group for the last 5 years who are now in their mid-90s, getting their stories and just, looking at their life at the end of their life, because so much of their time at the end of their life is now talking about World War II. Right? It's really interesting. So I don't know where that's going to go yet, but I've been, shooting that, and I've been in Europe 3 or 4 times already when they've gone back in celebration of D-Day or things like that. So, and that's my passion, one of my passions. So, but I've never given up shooting. I'm always, got my camera, and we shoot in development. We shoot. I'm out there shooting second camera, or I'm out there with the director by, just the two of us going and getting B-roll on some, sensitive subjects that we don't want anyone else around. So I think as far as future projects, I think I'm living my future projects. I think I'm doing it. I have asked other women about this, about, putting your gender first. For opportunities, and a lot of them will say, well, I want to be treated the same. I don't want to be known gender first. I want to be known for my ability and my credentials first. And but I think, and that's fine, but I think we still do have to think of our gender first, because we're missing opportunities. And I think it's great that the agencies now are really aware of the percentages of women and other minority groups, invisible minority groups that are underrepresented. I think we really need to do the training. There's not enough training. I think I know women who are starting up this cause, and they call it "No More Training, Just Hire Us." And I think that's great, but you need the training. So let's give them more training, and maybe we do it differently than we did before. Maybe we isolate the women, and treat them separately, in their own, having their own association, or maybe having their own branch of the CSC. I know women on the West Coast who are shooting. I know there's a lot of women in Toronto who are shooting, who are just kind of under the, you don't hear about them because they're shooting their own films or they're doing second camera, but if we could just give them the opportunity to learn more of their skill and make them better, camera women and DPs, that would do a lot for the industry, and that would do a lot for women that want to work in the camera department, the camera end of things. I learned a lot from other women. I mean, women gave me opportunities. I worked with a fantastic DOP from the States called Diana Taylor, and I worked with 2 DPs from the West Coast in BC in the earlier in my career, and it was phenomenal to work with them. You know, Zoe Durst. I was Zoe Durst's first camera assistant when she worked on her first film for the NFB in Montreal. She called me up and she said, "Can you come to Montreal and be my camera assistant?" And so, you know, that we had that camaraderie there. We did support each other, and that I think a lot of that came out of Studio D. So we should get that back. We should have that back, and maybe the CSC can do something. When you look back historically at what happened in the 70s and 80s to get women out there, even in the sound department, do you know any sound women right now? None. And there were at least 3 or 4 when we were starting out that were doing sound. There's Ingrid Kussel, Erilyn Wiseman. They're just not there anymore. And why? The camera assistants now are they store the data, they manage the data. That's what they're doing. Even in the editing department, I have one young woman that I'm working with now, and she wants to be an editor so badly, but there's none of that traditional assistant editor job position anymore, right? It's just, you know, just conform the material, the digital material onto drives, give it to your editor, but you're not sitting in an editing room. So I think we're losing the opportunities for women in the training sector because we're losing those jobs. How do we get them back? And maybe there's some way that the National Film Board or the CBC or, you know, even the CMF can develop new programs that will allow a production to have like a proper camera assistant on a shoot, a proper assistant editor on a shoot for a woman to train them. So I think we really need to take a look at where we are now and think back to what came before us, because I think things were working in the 80s, and then they just fell apart. So, you know, the film board put out a statistic saying that 12% of the DPs on their productions were women. But again, you know, there's a lot of tokenism out there too, and where there'll be 2 or 3 women, right, that are the chosen women to shoot everything. And I remember when Studio D hired, there was the first woman who ran Susan Tro was the first woman shooter at the NFB, I believe. And then she went on to run the camera department because she had a young son at that point, and she ran the camera department. And then Zoe was a woman that they brought in to be full-time camera DP, camera operator DP. Now that was great for her because that was, 20 odd years of working full-time at the NFB. What an opportunity. So, you know, I think those things still have to be there. I think those opportunities still have to be there.